On the 17th of November 2010, The Independent and Channel 4 hosted a public debate which was sponsored by Shell on the future strategy of Britain's energy. The debate, held at Manchester's Art Gallery, gave the public an opportunity to raise their concerns with those directly involved. The Independent's Michael McCarthy kicked off proceedings by asking whether it was too late to do anything at all within the next 40 years.
Do you really think a timescale of only 40 years is enough to reduce carbon emissions by 80%?
This is a political decision. When it comes down to it, we cannot, for example, solve the problem of climate change and the environmental problems that we face, while at the same time, for example, fighting multi-trillion wars in Iraq or Afghanistan, or multi-trillion-dollar bailouts of the banks, or all the other multi-trillion dollars that we spend on weapons of mass destruction or on armaments, then of course there's absolutely no question about it. We could solve this problem.
So it's not just about an 80% reduction, it's also about what we do today, what we do in the next 10 years and the 10 years after that and so on. And the issues really are about how fast can we change the energy base and the technology base that we've got.
Can we deploy it fast enough? Will it wreck our economies to do this? No. It's really clear that it won't. Actually, right now, if anything, it would really help make our economies go and drive forward really fast. But it won't wreck our economies. It'll do something much more difficult than that, much more difficult to deal with. It will change the balance of winners and losers. It will alter who wins and who loses. Guess what will happen in this problem like it does most others? The losers will shout very loud, and the winners will sort of walk away quietly saying, thank you very much. And that means this really does come down to the politics and getting the politics right.
We know how to insulate houses. We know how to do carbon capture and storage, by and large. We know how to generate renewable energy. We know how to do nuclear and so on. They're all, the technologies are around and are available. And on current technologies that exist at the moment, it is theoretically possible. The problem is there is this huge gulf between the theory and the practice. And the practice, at the end of the day, comes down to politics and political will.
It's good to see that Europe does actually have a carbon market. It's the only one in the world of any consequence, and it is starting to drive change, but it's not sufficient yet.
It'll just be a change, and we're not good at that kind of change. And what we're looking for here enormously is not politics as the art of the possible, but political leadership, which is the art of making the realm of the possible bigger. And we're not yet getting anything like the political leadership we need.
You look at the recent midterm elections in America and the Republican takeover of the lower house of Congress. That now means that any hope there might have been of a climate change bill in America, which is probably the key to unlocking the international negotiations, is on hold now for at least another 2 years. It delays everything for another 2 years.
To say that in a democracy we can't make these kind of changes, I imagine that they could just introduce a bit of government legislation and all vote on it in Parliament and then force everyone, not to use their cars or whatever.
Politics and economics can't be separated, and economics and society cannot be separated. People talking about lifestyle change, people are constrained by so many things. You're constrained by your job, you're constrained by, what your friends think, what the fashion is, and I don't think you can blame the public.
I think the difficult thing about climate change is there is a structural difficulty with this. It's a unique problem because it takes place in the future. We've never really had a problem before in human history that takes place in the future. In a democracy, this is a very difficult problem to deal with because ordinary people can't really see that it matters to them.
My age group, the age group of the people on this panel, have done very nicely out of despoiling the planet. The younger generation are going to face the consequences of that.
Would it be desirable? Would I prefer to live in a world in which we all did less? Yes, I would. I think we're going to be living in that world anytime soon? Not really. Do I think that this will help solve the problem? Not much. I think it's what we do collectively that's going to solve this problem, not what we do as individuals. That doesn't mean to say that what we do as individuals isn't important. It really is. but it would be a mistake to think that in a planet of 6.5 billion people that you're going to get enough of that to actually do something in the 40 years or so in which we've got to do it.
As society and humans, individuals, we need to make choices that are different, not less but different. And so they will have lesser energy impacts, but they could lead to a higher quality of life and a higher degree of satisfaction for us as individuals.
The thing that makes me angry about what is going on here is that the corporations are actively lobbying against efficiency standards. And that is where the problem lies, because if we could reduce demand, then we don't need to go to these extreme environments to get oil.
The simple fact is that extracting oil from tar sands is frankly barking. I mean, nobody in their right mind would use that amount of energy to create oil, which is basically being generated to fuel cars.
I think we need to put oil sands and all of the developments around the world in context. They currently contribute primarily to economic development. Today, we respond to the economic stimulus that causes projects like the oil sands to come about. It causes projects all over the world to come about. Natural gas projects, wind projects, solar projects, all sorts of things are happening around the world. All of those are contributing to the energy required for the economic development, which is the model that we're all in today. I think going forward, what we want to see is that has to shift. It has to shift such that the projects that are done in a more sustainable way, that the CO2 emissions are minimised.
I like to come to these sorts of events to sort of see what are people thinking, you know, what's the limitations of thinking, what do people think is the sort of next set of actions that could be taken.
The concept of consumer's choice still rules our behaviour in relation to carbon. Should this now be restricted for the public good? And I say that particularly in the context of the title of tonight's debate, can we cut carbon in time? Is it time to restrict choice, and how?
I think the answer is yes. And in fact, in Europe, that is happening today. So Europe has an emissions target, and at least under the European emissions trading system, the industrial system and the power generation system has a carbon limit. It's been imposed for the public good. Is it sufficient? Is it doing the job yet? It's starting to, but there's a lot more to do.
In energy terms, are we going to be forced to make different choices? No, because we don't make any of the choices now, except to switch on the light or fill up the tank, and we're going to go on being able to make those choices, and nobody's going to stop us doing that. The people who do make the choices about how energy is supplied are going to be constrained enormously. The oil companies are going to be constrained, the car companies are going to be constrained, so are a lot of other people if we do that, but not individual citizens. So you need to be really careful about whose choices you think you're going to constrain.
Well, the answer is yes, you can do it, and as Mike points out, you can put a tax on aeroplanes, you could try and find ways of forcing prices up with taxes, but unless you have, if you like, a society which is almost on a war footing, certainly in the democratic West anyway, you are not going to be able to directly force people not to have something in a democracy very easily.
Theoretically, out there exists the technology to power our world from renewable sources if we wanted to do it.
In terms of our future, the point was made that we aren't considering or forward-thinking enough in this country, and the responsibility of education wasn't at any point tackled, and we have a massive responsibility in terms of educating our children in terms of sustainability, and I feel that that is something that maybe could have been mentioned more.
The public are ready for change. What exactly is it you want us to do? And how are you going to facilitate that? We're ready for change. Please put in place mechanisms which facilitate that change.
If you look at the rate at which new energy comes into the market and which it expands and we use it, it takes about 25 years for a new energy source to grab about 1% of the world's market share. So we're really fighting, and that's a historical trend that's been repeated over and over again from wood to coal and coal to oil and oil to gas and nuclear and wind and biofuels and everything else along the way. So we're really fighting quite a historical legacy there, which we need to do.
I think a lot of this thing is to do with power and money. Is like, actually, how can we give ordinary people a voice, make ordinary people feel empowered to actually make the changes that we need, and to be able to do that on a global level.
All the use of fossil fuel that we have in the world has to be linked with carbon capture and storage. Otherwise, we can't use it. Where we are today is that the rate of development of the technology is not at a sufficient speed to bring it on fast enough to deliver the sort of outcome that it has the potential to do.
Carbon capture and storage has potential. It's more than that. It is, as David says, absolutely essential. Without carbon capture and storage, it will simply be impossible to achieve the sorts of targets that we need to achieve to get to the low carbon world that is necessary. The big problem with carbon capture and storage still is actually getting the CO2 out of the power plants in the first place.
Hiya, I think John's already briefly mentioned it, but I'd be interested to hear the panel's views on promoting nuclear power as a way of cutting the carbon emissions.
The issue with nuclear, though, is this generational one, and it's what you do with the waste. I mean, it remains a massive problem.
Waste hangs around is toxic for roughly 1 million years, according to the nuclear industry itself. That's, I think, 4 times longer than we've been on this planet, which is about 250,000 years, I think. So when you just kind of think you get a few decades worth of electricity, and then there's many generations that got to look after your waste, I wouldn't classify that as sustainable.
But I don't think that you can just start crossing things off and saying, oh, I don't like that part of the solution, because we're going to need all of these things to both meet the energy needs and meet the emissions challenge.
Richard Lambert, the head of the CBI today, denounced the government for their pathetic response to the establishment of a green investment bank and putting capital into it, which is just a couple of billion. I mean, it's peanuts when you look at the possibilities that we could have for developing a low-carbon economy from the establishment of such a bank. And I think that it's just one example of the problem where this lies right at the heart of politics, where something which is such a no-brainer, so easy to do, is supported right across the spectrum, from Greenpeace to the CBI, yet the politics seems to be so difficult.
The thing I've learned, I think, appreciated even more from tonight, is that it's not as simple as you think. It's a very, very complex problem. And so the reason that Copenhagen failed wasn't just a simple reason that A was pig-headed and B was pig-headed and they couldn't agree. If you remember, Tolstoy said that the people at the top of the political pile have less freedom than anybody else, actually, because huge forces are acting on them and constraining their choices. And so even if it hasn't given a very optimistic message about can we cut carbon in time, perhaps it's enabled us to understand that it's a difficult problem, and through understanding that it's a difficult problem, we may be able to see our way forward better.
It's the first I've attended. It was a subject close to my heart, which is why I attended, but I think the whole thing's been excellent.